What's going on, Watch fans? Very special guest today, Stephen McDonnell. Welcome back to Forward Momentum. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Todd. Thank you very much for asking me back. This is it's very, very exciting to the prospect of another in-depth chat with yourself is always a bit of fun. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this leads us. Absolutely.
Well, it's great to have you back. Thank you for agreeing to do this a second time with me. What's been keeping you busy since we last spoke?
Well, okay. Well, I've been. Of course, I can't really, as usual, I can't really say too much. But I've been finishing off. There's some more stuff coming with MB&F, so I've been finishing some stuff off, tying up various loose ends on something which is sort of coming. And then I have been working on another project, which is a little bit more long term. That will see the light of day for a year or two. And then actually now I've just, in the last month or so, I've just begun a new thing, a new MB&F project. I proposed a load of ideas to them in January, and we chose something which everybody thinks is interesting. So I'm now just literally getting my teeth into that project at the minute. I've only been on it a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, so very early days. But it's exciting. I like the sort of idea, and it really interests me. So, early days, as I say, Todd. But I'm really it's fun. I like it. So let's see.
That's great. That's exciting to hear. I'm glad to hear there are more projects in the pipeline, and I can't wait to see what you are cooking up in the behind the scenes here.
Well, listen, there are loads of ideas, loads of things in the pipeline. The only problem is if I'm not sure what I don't. There's no chance of me living long enough to ever realize a quarter of them. But that's the that's the limiting factor, unfortunately.
Yeah. It turns out, time is the arbiter of all things.
I find that. Well, I say this to people all the time. My greatest obstacle in all of this is time. Causes me more problems than anything else. There's nowhere near enough of it. So if I could find a way to do something about that, then that would be marvelous. But so far, I haven't found a solution, Todd. We'll see.
Well, maybe we need to employ some theory of relativity here and put your workshop on a rocket ship, send you out into space, bring you back, and maybe that buys you some more time. I don't know. I feel like there's something about the theory of relativity in there. But I digress. I know you were also at Dubai Watch Week. I'd love to hear how that experience was for you.
Dubai was great. Actually, it was brilliant. That was back in November. I almost didn't make it because I had COVID. Like we all our family, we all had COVID like right before, and I actually only tested negative literally the day before I was due to take the flight. So I was like this close to not being able to attend at all. But I made it anyway. Although I have to say I was not feeling 100%. But I mean, it was good. I met lots of people, and it's a great event. It's a good event. There's everything is kind of all there, and it's really well organized. And I did this. I gave a talk. That was my main reason for going. I was invited to give a talk, which was I had entitled "The Trials and Tribulations of Watch Innovation." So that was done in the creative hub there in Dubai Watch Week. It's not just about showing watches. I mean, they've got like an area for doing talks, and they've got an area for doing workshops. They've got and all the auction houses are there as well as looking at all the watches and the different brands. There's a great deal going on. It's a very sort of dynamic event. So yeah, I gave this talk, and I don't know, that seemed to go down. It seemed to go down quite well because I mean, I don't know, if you look at those talks, usually they get like 200 or 300 views. It's not. They're all on YouTube now, and those talks usually get 200 or 300 views because they're quite specialized. But mine's had like over 11,000 now, I think, something like that. So it was cool because like the guys from like Ian Skellern was there, from Quill and Pad, and some of the other the big journalists were there, and they really liked it, and they highlighted it and signposted it, So I don't know. It seems to have struck a chord with people, and for me, that's very exciting. I don't know. I got a standing ovation, so anyway, I don't know. That was for me. That was exciting, and as I say, I don't do things like that often, Todd, at all. That's not in any way my comfort zone. It's quite far from it. So, like, I spent time to prepare the talk, but I think anything like that, if I'm although it isn't the thing that I do very often. If I'm going to do it, I try to do it as well as possible, so I put some time and effort into preparing it and really thinking about what I wanted to say. And I don't know, as I say, hopefully it seems to have resonated with people. So, again, that's it's for me, that's exciting,
Yeah, absolutely. It was fantastic.
Oh, you've seen it.
great.
You've seen it, have you? Right. Okay.
I was not
Okay.
there.
Yeah. I know.
I was not there. We were otherwise occupied here, but
sure, I know. Of course, that's right. Yeah, I know.
It was a great speech and or a great talk, and everyone I know who was there live said it was absolutely amazing. And so hats off to you, Stephen. We'll link it in the show notes here so people can go out and watch it if they haven't seen it, because it's worth the watch. So
cool. There you go. Well, it's just like, as I said, it's just me. Really, all I was trying to do was just be completely honest and transparent about like what I do, how I do it, and how that feels. So I mean, there was no BS or anything. It's just that's just as I find it. And it's just me being completely honest. So yeah, I don't know. As I say, I think you can stand up all day. I've seen hundreds of watch talks at events, and people go on, this sort of stuff. Well, now we've done the new version of the watch with the anthracite dial, and it's got a platinum case, and you're like, God, I've fallen asleep. It's so boring. So you've heard all that, the product stuff, a million times. So I think what we as human beings, what is the thing that we can all relate to, regardless of actually whether we're interested in watches or not. It's the human story and the human experience. So I mean, I of course I included a bit some technical stuff about the watch and the design and how the process goes, just to give people sort of an insight into the process that I work with when I'm doing the design of watches. But I also talk just a bit about me and I suppose how I feel about it. And I think on the human side, as I say, that's the one thing that we all have in common, right? So I just wanted to sort of I think that if you tell this completely sort of banal, standard surface story about, I developed this and I developed that and then I developed something else and then this watch and that watch, okay, that's all great. But I mean, it's got no real human context. It's just a list of various facts, which in a way it's fine, but it has no, I think without the human context, it's harder to relate to it. It becomes just like a sort of a product explanation, it's just, I don't know. Maybe it's interesting to a certain point, but I don't know. Personally, as I say, I've been on lots of things like that, and I find it all quite tedious.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think it's the relatable human challenge and that sort of pursuit of quality, of excellence, of achieving something that it's relatable to everybody, because anybody, whether you like watches or not, you can relate to that human story, and it's sort of. To me, it feels a little bit like the Ford versus Ferrari story in some ways, where there's a sort of relatable nature to it, because it's the company that's spending untold millions of dollars to develop a car to compete, and the small factory in Maranello that's making 12 cars a year that is still producing race-winning results. And it's hard to kind of comprehend that, but it's always that relentless pursuit of perfection. And I think that is relatable to anybody who is a creative, an entrepreneur, or somebody who's building a business, or anybody who works in a business where they want to succeed. It's just relatable stories from that perspective.
Well,
or it's that
I think
relatable human connection.
I think exactly what you said is very interesting, because I mean, afterwards I got I got loads of cool feedback from people. Loads of people wrote to me afterwards. And like loads of the people who wrote, of course, lots of people who are interested in watches wrote, and watchmakers wrote, and watch collectors wrote. But I also got lots of messages from people who aren't in the watch industry at all, and had somehow found their way to the talk through other means. And people who were not watchmakers or collectors, but in sort of allied things, maybe working in mechanics and stuff. And it's exactly as you say. That is the thing that's relatable, is that, okay, maybe they're not working specifically with watches in some way, or concerned with watches in some way, but the idea of facing a challenge, and like a design challenge, and how do you sort of master this? How do you take this on and and beat the problem and still somehow hang on to your sanity at the same time. I mean, we're many of us all grappling with those problems in all sorts of different walks of life. So I think that's what, as I say, if I have anything to say on the human side, it's about just my experiences, and then that is the thing that we as human beings, we can all relate to, regardless of whether you're in watchmaking or whether you're in something else.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a worthwhile discussion, and I will we'll link it in the show notes so people can go check it out, because I think it's worth people watching. Stephen, I don't understand, 1/1000th of the information that you do about watchmaking and the technical aspects of watchmaking, but you have been an inspiration for me to get deeper into my crafts and to be, a better master of them, and to understand them better, and to kind of understand the whole fundamental nature of this industry in a better way. So I can't thank you enough for the inspiration. And I think everyone who I spoke to who has seen your talk or was there live felt the same way. I regret that I wasn't able to be there.
I'm delighted you think that, Todd. I mean, that's very that warms my heart that you say that. So thank you very much for saying that. That means a great deal.
Of course.
Of course. I think I suppose that I love it to distraction. It as we've discussed before, it drives me around the bend. It's like I can't live with it, but I can't live without it. All those superlatives, that you've heard me reeling off before. But in my heart, I just adore it. I love it. I've got so much enthusiasm for it, and I suppose I want to try to transmit a bit some of that excitement and interest to anybody I can. I'm a great sort of. I'm always proselytizing, talking about watches and trying to, explain to people why this is interesting or that's interesting, or have you heard of this bit of history, and how many things in life relate to watches or horology or clocks, and maybe ways that people that maybe aren't necessarily obvious to people, especially in this day and age. So I always try to take an opportunity to explain and try to transmit a wee bit of my enthusiasm to other people. So in your case, I'm delighted that you find it interesting, Todd. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, I know that you've got a lot going on, and I know that you are a busy guy these days. I wanted to jump kind of into the meat of our conversation today, which, in our last show, we talked a lot about development. How does your process work? And we actually spoke very particularly about the legacy machine Perpetual, and the legacy machine Perpetual EVO, and how the programming kind of came together for that, and finding solutions for the actual programming gear train and the issues that were inherent within that. And today I wanted to talk to you actually about the sequential EVO, because I know that that's a completely different story. And I know that every watch that you create has its own story and has its own issues that arise with it. I'd love to hear the story of the sequential EVO and how it came about. But I guess for starters, where did the idea for the sequential EVO, or for a chronograph even, come from for you?
Well, it was a couple of things. I think obviously the chronograph is one of those classic complications. It's been around a long time. I think it's really it's almost like it is a quite a significant status, I would say, in the watch world. And I think it was very obvious to me that MB&F didn't have a chronograph, and to me that was the really in that sense, in terms of what they had done and what they had not yet done, the chronograph was like the really obvious next place to go. So I think that was the first thing. It was really clearly they need a chronograph. I suppose that was the first thing. The second thing for me was more the interesting challenge from my point of view. I mean, I've always been very interested in classic sports timing. I'm very interested in old motorbikes and old cars and racing, all this sort of stuff. And I've always been intrigued by the sort of classic era of sports timing. So if you think about the sort of emergence of motorsport, like 100 years ago, the 1910s, 1920s, that sort of era, of course, very quickly people had to solve problems in terms of how are you going to manage this timekeeping thing, because it's important to be able to measure laps and measure all these things, and that problem was solved in a particular way 100 years ago, and I thought it would be really interesting to find a way to integrate those solutions into a watch, into a single watch. Now, how that was done 100 years ago was that you would have, obviously, you'd have this. Say you're at a I don't know, let's say a car race, and the cars are going to race, I don't know, 5 laps or something. Okay, let's say it like this. Let's say it's a single car, and the car's doing practice laps. It's going to do 5 laps, and the laps are flying laps. That means the car doesn't stop at the end of one and restart. It's just going to do 5 continuous laps. And what you want to know is the individual times for each lap. That's very important. So if you imagine with a conventional chronograph, let's say we have a conventional chronograph, you have a start-stop button and you've a reset to 0 button. Okay, so at the very beginning, whenever the starting gun goes off, the car starts off on its first lap, you start your chronograph. That's all great. Then the chronograph is running during lap 1, and as the car passes the start-finish line at the end of lap 1, remember, we're trying to get the individual times for each lap. So at the end of lap 1, you would have to stop your chronograph. You'd have to record the time for lap 1. You'd have to press return to 0 to reset the chronograph, and then restart the chronograph and do all that instantaneously, which is clearly impossible, right? So how they did this back in the day was, instead of having a single watch, you would literally have multiple physical watches, like 3 or 4 stopwatches or chronographs physically fixed on a frame. You have a big lever, and this like a big handle, this great big handle, and then the handle is attached to like a set of levers. And what the levers would do is whenever you press your handle, the levers would physically press multiple buttons on these watches all at once. So that means you'd have one at the very beginning. You'd start one of the watches at the start of lap 1, and then at the end of lap 1, as the car passes the start-finish line, you press this single lever, and the lever would press 2 buttons on 2 watches. It would stop the first one from lap 1, and it would start another one to time lap 2. So then the lap 1 watch is stopped. You can record the time. You can reset it to 0 at your leisure during lap 2. And then the watch beside it is meanwhile recording lap 2. So you can do it, but you need multiple watches to do it, you see. And and it's very interesting. You can go to like the Omega Museum or the Longines Museum. These sort of companies who specialized in sports timing back in that era. It's very interesting. I suppose that I found this fascinating, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if you could find a way to integrate all that functionality but into a single watch? And that, for me, that was the inspiration to actually find my way to come up with the project in the first place.
Amazing. That's such a cool history. And this is like right up my alley, because the first season of this show was all about the history of watches and motorsport. And my mind is flashing back right now to the Heuer clipboards that had multiple Heuer rally chronographs in them to be able to so you could start, stop, and time lapse. And I actually think the movie Le Mans, the Steve McQueen movie Le Mans, which was a disaster of its own right, features those clipboards. But maybe at that point in time, Heuer had developed the ASITS technology. I don't know. But this is so fascinating. And okay, so Stephen, this is a sidebar conversation that we're going to have at some point in time about the history of motorsport and watches.
But it is cool. I mean, think of lots of things. Think very simply of just you've got 2 cars, and they're just going to do a straight run, and you have a start line and a finish line, and those 2 lines are, I don't know, 500 meters, or let's say they're a mile apart. The two cars begin together at the start line, but you want to know the individual times for each car over that mile. So you start both watches at the beginning. Whenever the gun goes off, you start both watches together, one for each car. And then as car 1 passes the finish line, you stop the watch for car 1. And then as car 2 crosses the finish line, you stop the watch for car 2. So again, it's the same thing. In order to time these 2 cars simultaneously over a single run, you need to have 2 watches to do that. So again, I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if you could again integrate this into a single watch? So it's really to break it down. It's not actually about cars or motorbikes or how long it takes to boil an egg. These things are universally applicable. It's about finding ways to time events sequentially, hence the name for the watch. So if you want to time 5 laps sequentially, one after the other without any break, you need to have a sequential system to do that. Or if you want to time 2 things which begin at the same time and stop at different times, effectively you need 2 separate chronographs, which you can start together but then finish according to when the two events stop. So it's to allow things like that. It's even things like a chess clock. Imagine a chess clock. It's a cumulative counter. So you've got one player and the other player, and what you're doing is you're accumulating the time for each of those players, and you're flipping the timing system between player A and player B, player A, player B. It's exactly the same thing. You can't do that. That's difficult to do with a chronograph on your wrist, because if player A is wearing a chronograph and player B is wearing a chronograph, the problem is you can never get them to press the start-stop button at the same moment. It's just impossible. You have to have some sort of system. Hence the idea with the board and the levers. It's the lever system which allows you to press the buttons on those multiple watches simultaneously, and that way you retain precision. You can't have a guy here with watch 1 and a guy here with watch 2. And whenever the car crosses the line, they try to press the buttons together. It's never going to be precise. Maybe it works a bit, but after 10 laps, the precision's gone, because there's no way those guys can work. They can work with absolute to be absolutely synchronized in what they're doing. So you need to have a system which brings absolute synchronization to when you start and stop the different watches. So you see, all of this was all boiling around in my head, Todd. You know what I mean? So I was thinking, well, I want to bring all this functionality. I want to have the precision. I want to have all this stuff, but in one watch. So
it's amazing.
Yeah,
that's amazing. You go. And that's actually the analogy I use most of the time. Not knowing the motorsport heritage. I mean, like, that was evident in the MB&F marketing materials and press materials from the watch. But I always explain it to people like a chess timer, because it's that functionality inside of a single watch, which is a very cool thing. I want to pause 1 second on the watch. I'm curious. Do you have a favorite car or motorbike from that period of racing, from that sort of initial period in the 1910, 1920 range? Or is there a car that you absolutely adore?
I suppose my real close interest in that stuff is in vintage motorcycles. I'm really interested in Norton. Norton's like an old British, English made bikes were made in Birmingham, and I'm really interested in Norton they're not really. They are still a going concern. They've been revitalized, but in terms of a racing mark, they're not. They haven't been a force to be reckoned with for many decades. But there was an era when Norton they won everything. In the sort of 1930s, 40s, 50s, they were incredibly successful. Whenever they had this amazing single-cylinder overhead camshaft engine, which was featured in the Manx Norton, which was a very innovative motorbike, and I love those things. I'm really interested in those, that era of like vintage racing and motorbikes and stuff. And that was the time whenever you as a privateer, you could show up with a few spanners in the back of your car and race your motorbike and win. And whereas the idea of doing things alone now is completely impossible as a privateer, unless you have a huge racing team and you've got all these resources and sponsors and all these people working for you and blah, blah, blah. I also like the way in those days it was the actual racers itself. The racers themselves knew all about the mechanicking and the repairing and the modifying, whereas now the two things are completely divorced. The racers are riders, they do that, and then the mechanics do that. And of course they converse, but the racers don't tend to get oil on their hands anymore, So but for me, Norton's a fantastic, iconic racing motorbike.
So are you a motorcyclist yourself?
Oh, I am. Yes. I've got a Norton in the garage. Yeah, which I'm in the middle of restoring, but it's always the same problem. Watchmaking is such a jealous mistress, Todd, that it consumes all my time and energy. And then, of course, I've got my family. So it's just very hard. Motorcycling is a very selfish and very solitary business. So it's hard for me to justify the time sort of doing that at the expense of other things. So I'm working on that, but I just it's hard to find the time to get it finished off. But it's little by little, we're getting there.
Are we looking at a retirement career?
Well, if I move the camera, the cylinder head is sitting over there in the corner, so so it's not, and the gearbox is in pieces in a box somewhere over there, So I'm not. It's not just. It's not. It's very much. It's still a work in progress, But bear with me, Todd. Bear with me, huh? I'm trying my. It's because you guys keep demanding more watches. You see, that's the problem. And I kind of. you know.
Always comes back to the collector being the problem. Totally understood.
Well, it's watches. You know, watches takes up everything. It takes up so much time. It takes so long to do these things. You know, I mean, watchmaking is not. I've told you this before, Todd, but it's not like a 9 to 5 job. It's not as though I'm in here at 9 o'clock, nice in the morning, and then I work through the day, and then 5 o'clock comes, clock off at 5, done, go and do my thing. You know, it's I'm at it all the time, and when I'm not working at it, it's in my head, going around and around in my head. You know, I'm thinking about it, yeah. And then of course, and then I think it's very important to try to spend time with my children and my family and stuff. You know, and I don't want to be the sort of person that just, you know, I do the work and then I go and fiddle about and tinker with my own projects and toys at the weekend. I think it's really important to set time aside for the family. So between watchmaking and family, it's really very hard to find any other than just a little, maybe an hour in the evening here and there, you know. So as I say, that's what I mean. I am progressing, but slowly, you know. So it's the best I can do.
Well, when you do get it finished, I would love to see it.
Yeah. Certainly,
I'm sure it'll be awesome.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, there's a lot of I think my mind goes a lot of places. There's a lot of cars that I absolutely love and adore. Honestly, one of the ones that has been a more modern reinterpretation for me has been the Morgan, and especially the Morgan 3-wheel. I find that car incredibly fascinating, but I've always loved the Jaguar D-Type. That car for me is just like, that is what racing cars should look like.
Yeah, I agree. It's a thing of great beauty. I agree entirely. Yeah. Absolutely. Awesome.
And yeah, they're beautiful objects. So I can see the inspiration from those racetracks, those early days of the rally world of, you know, endurance racing. I can see the inspiration in the watch, and I can see the idea for the watch forming. How did the pitch go when you went to MB&F and said, "Hey, I want to do a chronograph, but not just any chronograph"? What was that process like?
Oh, it was funny, yeah, because it was actually the first time I ever mentioned it to Max. It was just after I was in Dubai. It was the last time I was in Dubai, so it was Dubai 2016, I suppose. You know, so this is many. Bear in mind, of course, whenever we discuss these things, you know, we always we're lining up the next project years before we're going to start it. You know, it's not as if we get to the end of project A and then I finish project A on a Friday and then Monday morning we decide, okay, what are we going to do for project B? We've already lined up what B and C are going to be, you know, possibly years in advance, you know, and we're always thinking about the next idea and so on. So the ideas are discussed long before you actually come to begin to work on it, you know. So I was in Dubai with Max. It was just after the Perpetual Calendar won the Calendar Prize in the GPHG in 2016, I think it was, you know. And then the watches were all on show at Dubai, and I was over. And so Max, we were having dinner, and Max had just bought this beautiful, like a Tiffany split chronograph pocket watch. You know, he bought it in auction, and he was all delighted with his great new addition. That this thing, you know, so he hadn't collected it yet. He just had pictures on his phone, and he was showing me. He was all excited, you know, and I was like a bit sort of nonplussed, you know. And he's like, "Well, why?" He was a bit. I don't know if I offended him, but he was like, "Do you not like it?" And I said, "Well, you know," I said something along the lines of, you know, typical me. I said something along the lines of, "Well, it's just the same sort of, you know, limited functionality and technical limitations that all other chronographs have, you know." So I said, "Well, you know, like it's nice, but." You know, it's just more of the same, really, you know. And so I don't know. So Max was interested in this, and we talked more about it. You see, and of course, I had this idea about this watch, but I have loads of ideas, Todd. You see, and I've got notebooks and stuff full of ideas over here, and I think some ideas are definitely like work ideas that would suit MB&F. Some ideas are maybe ideas that might suit somebody else, and some ideas are just things that I just for my own sort of interest, you know what I mean? For me, just stuff that I don't know where they would fit, but I think they're interesting, and I keep an eye on all these things, you know. So Max had always said, MB&F had always said that there's no interest in doing a watch with a seconds hand. So it wasn't there. You know, if you think of all the watches they had done until the sequential chronograph appeared, there's no seconds hands on any of those watches. And I think it was just like sort of from a sort of a style brand DNA type thing. They just weren't really interested in seconds hands. It's not that they were avoiding. It didn't seem to suit what they were doing, So they always said no seconds hands. And then suddenly here was I proposing a watch with 2 seconds hands. So so for that reason, I had always assumed that was an idea that I liked. I had it all sort of worked out how I was going to do it, but I just thought, well, that'll never be an MB&F idea. It won't interest them. It's not for them, So I hadn't pitched the idea or discussed it with them prior to that, just because I thought, well, it's not, that's not their thing. But we had this discussion, as I said, at dinner in Dubai, and Max talked about this, and I explained to Max the concept, just what I've been telling you, this idea, but if you want to time flying laps at a racetrack, or you want to have 2 things which start at the same time and stop at different times, you can't do any of that with a normal chronograph. So I explained to him that I had this idea, that allows you to do all of that, and it could also operate like a chess timer, and all this. So of course that involves seconds hands, clearly, but I think Max realized that they found all this new. The interesting thing about that watch, or what has become the sequential chronograph, is that it brings loads of new functionality to a watch, which no previous watch has ever had. So there's loads and loads of things which are innovative from a technical point of view. And if you're the collector, the person wearing it, it's loads of reasons why it's really interesting. There's lots to get your teeth into if you're the watch collector. So I think I managed to convince Max that this was worth pursuing. And then, but I was in the middle of working on something else then, so we were just chatting. I was nowhere near starting it, so he liked the idea. We left it at that, and then I think we fast forward now a couple of years. I think it was 2018, maybe early 2019. Can't remember exactly. And so we were now going to take this further, and I came over to Geneva, and that was the first time I had formally pitched the idea to Max and his team, So we're sitting around a table, and I explained what I've just explained to you, about the timing and all this sort of stuff, and how it would do all these different things, And out of Max was sitting just to one side of me, and I could, out of the corner of my eye, I could see this big smile in his face getting bigger and bigger as I was explaining this again, because it was like 2 years since he'd heard the idea. And so they all liked it, and they all thought it was great. And in fact, it wasn't like I didn't have to sell it. I mean, they all liked it straight away. I didn't have to persuade them or twist anybody's arm. They were ready to go for it straight away. So it was from that point of view. I mean, they were very supportive. Away I went.
That's amazing. That is, I don't know. That feels like a really interesting pitch process. When you say that you had everything you had it laid out in your brain how you were going to do it, what was your approach? Did you have sort of a chronograph that you liked and recognized? Like, obviously, it's not a mono pusher for each chronograph. What was sort of the design start point for you for this watch?
The design start point was twofold. It was firstly the arrangement of the chronograph. So effectively what the watch has is it's got two completely independent chronographs. So that means, a conventional chronograph has got start, stop, and return to zero. You can play with those however you like. This watch needs to have not one, but 2 completely independent chronographs. So you've got 4 pushers. You've got start, stop, return to zero for chronograph A, and you've got start, stop, return to zero for chronograph B. So one chronograph's a mirror image of the other. Effectively, you can operate these 2 chronographs entirely independently. You can start and stop them and return them to zero whenever you like. It doesn't matter what the other one's doing. It doesn't matter if it's running or not running. It's literally like you have 2 completely separate and severed independent chronographs. So you can use it to time anything at all where you have something which two events which run concurrently, but which start at different times and stop at different times. So you can do anything like that you like. But in terms of the sports timing aspect of it, the important thing is to be able to control the 2 chronographs together and simultaneously. So that's where you get a 5th pusher, and the 5th pusher I used to always call the 5th pusher the magic button. MB&F christened it the twinverter. So the 5th pusher is the one which allows you to toggle the states of the 2 chronographs. So that means, and it's that thing I'm telling you, the 5th pusher does the job of the big lever that we talked about on the frame back in the 1920s. Yeah, when you've got all the watches mounted on the frame and the lever system. You've got a single handle, and you pull the single handle, and it will switch on and off multiple chronographs at once. So the 5th pusher, the magic button, the twinverter, It's the one which simultaneously operates both chronographs. And what it does, it simply flips the state of the chronographs. If both are running and you press the button, both stop. If both are stopped and you press the button, both start. And if A is running and B is stopped, you press the button and A stops and B starts. So whatever their state, it simply inverts their state. Hence the name twinverter. So once you have all those elements somehow in place, the watch will then fulfill all the functionality that I wanted to bring to it. So the answer to your question is twofold. It's firstly, that was what I wanted the watch to do, and that's how the watch needed to sort of be designed, that as I say, with two independent chronographs, but with an additional functionality to allow the two chronographs to be switched simultaneously. That's the first thing. The second thing is the actual fundamentals of the chronograph itself. And I mean the chronograph in a general sense. If you look at the architecture of the conventional chronograph for really the entire lifetime of that complication, it's a very strange business because, and again, this is what I was talking about with Max whenever in Dubai, he showed me his watch, and I was talking about the technical limitations and limited functionality. So technical flaws and limited functionality. With a conventional chronograph, whenever you start the chronograph, you effectively add you've got the chronograph, you've got the basic movement, which is telling the time and running all the time. It never stops; it's always ticking. And then you've got the chronograph section, and so whenever you start the chronograph, you link the base movement to the chronograph section, and the base movement turns the chronograph wheels. That's what you've got a clutch to do that, So whenever you start the chronograph, you join these two together, and then whenever you stop the chronograph, you sever that link. The base movement keeps going; it's always going, but the chronograph stops because you've severed the link where the base movement is driving the chronograph. But the thing is, in order to make this happen, the conventional system uses a friction spring, and it's a friction spring to eliminate the backlash from the gears and the chronograph system. So effectively what you do is, whenever you start the chronograph, at the moment that you want to have the most possible precision, what you do is you add in the effect of this great big friction spring into the way the base movement is working. So the moment you start your chronograph, the amplitude will drop by like 20 or 30%, just like that, and it will keep running at this lower level until you stop your chronograph again. In addition, you've also got the minute counter. So the minute counter, if you observe your minute counter, it stays still most of the time, and then just at the end of the first minute, it will jump the first minute, second minute, third minute. So if you actually look at what this is doing to the performance of the watch, the base movement has to conquer this little jumper spring in the minute counter. So that means that if you observe what's happening with the amplitude of your watch, whenever it comes to actually having to jump the minute counter, you'll find that the amplitude dips because the minute counter jumper consumes even more energy, and then it will level out again once the thing has been jumped. So that means you've got two additional energy drains on the base movement. You've got the friction spring just to keep the seconds hand moving properly, and then you've got the minute counter itself, the minute counter jumper. So these things mean that you'll always have reduced precision and you've got reduced amplitude whenever the chronograph's running, which is exactly the opposite of what you want to have. You want to have excellent precision throughout. In the perfect watch, the amplitude, that means how much the oscillator is moving by the number of degrees that whenever you look at a watch, you'll see this wheel moving quickly. There's always the balance wheel on the dial, for example, on the legacy machine watches. That watch, that wheel is the heart of the timekeeping function of the whole watch. In a perfect watch, that wheel will oscillate at the same speed regardless of its amplitude. If it makes small movements or if it makes large movements, the movements will all take the same amount of time. However, in reality, that simply doesn't exist. So in order to have maximum precision, we want to keep the amplitude of the oscillator as steady as we possibly can. What we do not want to do is start our chronograph and then the amplitude of the oscillator drops. So this is how all chronographs work. They're fundamentally, as I say, the whole premise is flawed as far as I can. Really, that's the long and short of it. With a normal chronograph, okay, there is this drop in performance when you start the chronograph, but it's just about tolerable. The watch companies have found ways to sort of minimize the effects. It works well enough that we can accept it. The problem is if you take that design and you put two of those chronographs together driven by the same base movement, if you have both chronographs running together, all of those losses will be doubled. And that, Todd, that's when it becomes unacceptable, because you now have double the friction with a friction spring. You get double the effect of the minute counter, and what you'll end up with is a watch which, if both chronographs are running together, the performance, the timekeeping performance of the watch will be so impaired that fundamentally it just won't be acceptable anymore. So in order to do this watch with the two chronographs together working at the same time, I had to find a fundamentally new way to actually do the chronograph. It looks to solve the chronograph from solve it from a base level, from a starting point. The conventional layout where you have the clutch and you have the friction spring and all that, it's just no use. I had to throw all that out and sort of begin again. And that's when I came up with this idea of an internally jeweled vertical clutch. And that again is not the whole watch has like 5 patents. There's five newly patented mechanisms on that watch. One of which is the idea for the internally jeweled vertical clutch. And the internally jeweled vertical clutch is the key to the whole thing. And that is what makes the sequential chronograph possible. With the internally jeweled vertical clutch, we have the watch. If I couldn't think that up, there is no project. It doesn't exist. It's as simple as that. So that's the heart of the whole thing. And with that, and I should mention, with that, the watch has exactly the same amplitude with 0, 1, or 2 chronographs running. There is no change whatsoever.
I was just going to ask about that, because it makes so much sense that if you had 2 chronographs running, you would just overwhelm the watch and it would be so impaired in terms of timekeeping that it could never, it's just not a functional tool. It might be cool, but it's useless in terms of timekeeping and time telling. That's fascinating, Stephen. That's very cool.
So what you actually have is if you were to extrapolate that in one direction, take one of those chronographs. Imagine we take one of those chronographs and put it by itself in its own watch, its own little mini project. The new design of the chronograph is fundamentally better than any chronograph that's been done previously, because there is no change in amplitude whatsoever. So in order to make this watch possible, I had to sort of fundamentally reinvent how you solve the chronograph problem. So that was the challenge.
So you could extrapolate this technology in the patent to a single chronograph, not in a sequential chronograph, and it would be probably the one of, if not the most accurate chronograph out there.
Well, think back to what I said. Remember, the watch, the fundamental architecture of the watch is 2 completely independent chronographs. So for sure, one of those chronographs, you could simply just eliminate one of those, and what you're left with is the format of a conventional chronograph, but with the enhanced performance that the new design with the dual vertical clutch brings to the thing. So yes, absolutely.
Amazing. That's very cool. So as far as sort of prototyping this idea or building this idea out went, do you go straight into CAD? Do you go into like a SolidWorks and start building and designing? Do you do this on paper first? How does your process come together?
It starts really, I go straight into CAD. Everything's with, that, because a watch like that, particularly a chronograph, you've a chronograph and a perpetual calendar, you've lots and lots and lots of levers and springs and stuff. It's really all about geometry. It's endless geometry. So there's thousands and thousands. I think there's nearly 10,000 different geometric calculations or something within the main plate of that watch, to work everything out. The process very much is beginning with CAD, but you don't begin modeling. I should say I don't. In my process, I don't begin modeling parts. The first sort of 5 or 6 months is spent only drawing geometry. It's only drawing lines and arcs and circles and teeth, and it's the geometry. The geometry is what underlies everything that the watch does. Whenever you've got levers and things moving around, so. You don't start with actually designing the parts themselves. You start with the fundamental geometry which underlies everything, and then once you've got all the geometry together and everything makes sense, then you use the geometry to start to actually model the parts afterwards. So the parts are the components themselves are sort of phase 2 in the design process. So yeah, what we actually start with MB&F is we start literally just with a circle with how the watch is going to look. So we've very simply laid out, okay. This is how it's going to look. The two seconds counters are here. The minute counters are here. The hours and minutes are here, and the balance is here. So I've literally got a circle with with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with 6 smaller circles on top of that circle, which gives us the basic layout for what the dial is going to look like. That gives me the center points for all those main elements. And then once we've agreed that, because that's aesthetic, so that's important to agree with. We work with MB&F, and Max and Serge and so on to agree how that is laid out. And then once everybody's happy, then I then go off. Nobody hears from me for 6 months or so while I just draw geometry, So the first bit's quite dry. I mean, it sounds dry. I personally find it very interesting because I love geometry. I find that stuff really interesting and exciting. So, but that's how it goes. And then once you get sort of quite far into that, then you start to design parts and it starts to actually look like something,
Where did you run into a challenge building this watch or building this prototype? Like, we spoke about the perpetual EVO or the legacy machine perpetual and the inherent problems within perpetual calendars. Was the problem here in just developing a completely new chronograph, or where did you find the greatest challenge?
The design flowed nicely. I was happy with how the design flowed right from the start. I remember doing it. Actually, I remember it always felt like, I remember actually what I started with was the start-stop mechanism, because the two chronographs they're essentially they're perfect mirror images of each other. So it's a question of designing one chronograph, and then the second one is a mirror image of that. The tricky bit then is the magic button, the 5th button, which allows me to trigger both simultaneously. So that's an extra mechanism which I have to leave enough space that all fits together and see how that works, and also see that I can't do something crazy like because people do all sorts of daft stuff. And remember, safety is very important. So if somebody presses both start-stop buttons together while pressing the magic button, and turn the hands back, and turn the hands backwards simultaneously, what if anything could go wrong if you do all these things? So you've got to design the different mechanisms in such a way that everything is foolproof. You can't damage or snap teeth off. It's the old problem with the perpetual calendar. Remember, you have to make sure that whatever manipulation you can do with the watch, you can't damage anything. So that's very important, particularly with the 5th button, the magic button. You can't, if you're pressing something else at the same time as pressing the magic button, nothing could go wrong. All that stuff, it seemed to flow well. I was happy with how that came along, and the actual design of that watch I was happy with that. It went well, and the bridges actually is interesting. MB&F are obviously very interested in the bridges. They're very interested in the aesthetics of the watch. I mean, they're not. I suppose they trust me to do the technical side, and that the watch is going to work and it's going to do what I say it's going to do. So we don't dig into every tiny detail of what every lever does, and they trust me and all that stuff. But as the design is going along, I will be seeing them every 2-3 months, and we would broadly look at how the aesthetics are evolving, to make sure everybody's happy. And the bridges, they're very interested in the bridges, of course, because the bridges are very visual and front and center on the back of the watch, So I remember when I did the bridges, and I worked hard on the bridges, and I thought it was quite good. And I submitted the first draft of the bridges to MB&F, and that was the first time that's happened, that they liked it. There was nothing. The watch now, as you have it, is exactly as I designed the bridges the first time. It's exactly that. Nothing has changed, with one exception, Todd. Nothing has changed at all. That's my first draft of the bridges. So I don't know. The bridges it's one of those things I can't explain. It just came out, the bridges just came out. And remember, you can't think about one bridge in isolation of any of the others. You have to design the whole thing holistically. The bridges have to look nice, and they're each individually in its own right, but they also have to harmonize all with each other. So it's very important to think about the whole design of how this is going to look in a holistic way. So I don't know. I can't explain that. They came out, and I was really pleased with them. And MB&F are so funny, because they don't, and they're right. They're right. They're very excited whenever the watch is running and it's on the market and people love it. Then they're excited about it, but they really play it cool during this process. They want to see it working, and they want to see it the sort of finished thing. And of course, this is a big technical challenge. All these patents and everything, nobody's done it before, so there is no guarantee it's going to work. Let's be totally honest. So MB&F are very cool about it until we really have something to shout about. So usually with them, I'll only hear something if they're not happy. So I submitted the bridges. This is so funny. I submitted the bridges, and I did nothing. I didn't hear anything, not a word. That means they like it, That's how the process goes. Keep going, exactly. With, as I say, with the exception of just one of those, if you look at how the watch is laid out, there's four steel bridges which sit on top of the other bridges, and those are the bridges which support the actual. It's the back end of the clutch for the lower two, and the upper two support the transmission wheels for the minute counter. So there's four little steel bridges, and one of those we that was the only bit I didn't nail first time, was one of these little bridges. And actually, I've looked back through all my files. I ended up redesigning that bridge 15 times to get that. It's only a small bridge. It's one screw and 2 feet, and I redesigned it 15 times. And I sent them version after version after version after version. No, and then the 15th one, yep, that was it.
Perfect.
So that was a funny thing. So I spent a bit, the bridges all come out nicely, and then that one little tiny bridge took about 3 weeks to get right. I don't know why.
It's crazy. That's insanely cool. And when you start getting to the little bits of metal, okay, so when you start putting together a prototype of this watch, how did it come together for you first time around?
It was a total disaster. Next question.
Oh, no. Can I ask how so? Like how was it a total disaster?
Didn't work.
Oh no.
This was funny because I don't know. It's a very interesting parallel with the perpetual calendar, because if you remember back to our conversation about the perpetual calendar, I knew from very early on in the design that there was something very iffy about the perpetual calendar. There was a particular area of the programming, as you mentioned earlier, which I was very concerned wouldn't work properly, and I asked people about it and all this sort of stuff. We looked into it, and then right enough, when we got the prototyping, it didn't work. But I had known about that from very early on in the design process, So in one sense, it wasn't a shock. It was a shock how badly it did work in the end when I got the prototyping. But I knew there was this area. I was aware of that. The difference with the sequential chronograph, Todd, was that it also had a huge fundamental problem. But the difference is I had not spotted this, absolutely missed it, and it even now this has knocked my confidence so much, because I truly did not spot this glaring problem. I mean, looking back at it now, it's so flippant obvious, but somehow I was oblivious to it at the time. I really was confident, though. I was really happy with the design, as I explained. I was happy with how all the levers and the whole chronograph system was laid out. It just felt good. It was always that gut feeling I'm looking for. It felt good. The aesthetics looked good. MB&F loved the bridges. They loved how it all looked. And then I put it together. And, I fully thought that, okay, one or two, of course, there's always wee tweaks and wee adjustments and wee bits and pieces you need to do with the prototype. But I really did think, this ought to go pretty okay, and it was catastrophic. And it was catastrophic in a really weird way, because to think back to we were talking about cars before and that, so we have these vertical clutches. There's 2 vertical clutches, one for each chronograph, and the clutches work exactly like a clutch in a car. Now, I know all you guys in America don't use, you all use automatic cars. You don't use manual cars. This analogy will be more familiar to people over here who are
grew
more
up
used
driving
to
manual cars. So
there you
this is relatable.
Well, the thing is, if you have a manual car and the clutch wears out in your car, what will happen is the engine is spinning, but the motion of the engine is not being transmitted to the wheels. So as soon as you try to go uphill, you're revving the engine, but the car's not going forwards, because the clutch is slipping. There's not enough friction in the clutch. So the clutches in the 2 vertical clutches in the chronograph work. It's the same principle. It's a frictional link. So whenever you switch on the chronograph, you make this frictional link between the base movement and the chronograph system. And then whenever you switch the chronograph off, you sever the frictional link. But it is a frictional link. It's not a geared link. It's friction. So if there's a problem with the clutch and the friction is insufficient, what you would expect is that whenever you start the chronograph, you would expect the chronograph loses time against the base movement. You would expect the base movement, because the base movement's always going at the same speed, it's always telling the right time. So you would expect the chronograph to slip behind. So I remember very clearly, I was sitting on this very seat, when I did the prototyping of this bit, and it was the first time I'd assembled the chronograph system and got it all linked up and got it actually running. And it looked good, everything was going, and I adjusted everything so that the base movement and the chronograph were synchronized, and then I left the watch and came back in the next morning, and weirdly the chronograph was about 10 minutes ahead of the base movement. And I thought, my initial reaction was, okay, I've said it wrong. I've made a mistake. I was really tired. I haven't done something right. So I thought it was fine. I did the same thing again, set it up again, let it run overnight, another night. And the same thing, the chronograph didn't lose, gained 10 minutes on the base movement. And then it's dawning on me, the chronograph is actually gaining on the base movement. I mean, and this is impossible. Remember, the clutch in your car, the clutch is slipping. Therefore, the car is going faster. It's not losing. It's not going slower. It's going faster. How is this possible, right? I thought I was losing my mind. So this was really an unbelievable conundrum, Todd. And as I say, extremely disconcerting, as I had not anticipated this problem. So the difference again to compare it with the perpetual calendar was that, as I told you in that story, the perpetual calendar, it didn't work, and I tried everything to make it work, and then suddenly when I'd given up trying, this one had this sort of eureka moment, and the solution just popped into my head, and I made the new lever and then some other things, and it all worked fine. So that was like a solution, an instantaneous solution, just like appeared by magic. The sequential chronograph was much more a slow war of attrition, in that it was incremental improvements over a long period. So actually, the prototyping in total for the sequential chronograph took about 9 months. It's very, very, very long and very arduous, and so it was a load of different improvements. What was actually happening was, if you think again about the movement side, the bridge side. On the bridge side of the watch, you've got these two giant wheels. Yeah, and the two giant wheels that you can see there, what they do is they drive the minute counters. But the two giant wheels are being driven by the pinion on the end of the clutch. So you've got the clutch is turning the giant wheels, and then the giant wheels are turning the minute counters themselves, okay? Because the minute counters are always moving. They don't jump at the end of 1 minute. They're always sweeping, So you've got these very large wheels, and the very large wheels have got a lot of inertia. Now, it's very interesting. If you think about what's happening inside the watch, this watch beats at 21,600 vibrations per hour. What that means is you've got six beats per second. So if you really dig into what's happening inside the watch, think about the seconds hand. The seconds hand on a watch moves and jumps. It doesn't slide and sweep. It moves and jumps. If you look at a very fast beat watch like a Rolex, which is 28,800, or even Zenith El Primero, which is 36,000 vibrations per hour, it's moving so fast, it's beating so fast that it almost looks as if it's sweeping evenly. But it's a succession of individual beats. So in the case of this watch, which is beating 6 times per second, what's actually happening inside the watch is that the gear train, all of the wheels which operate the system inside, the gear train is normally still, it's not moving. And then 6 times per second, what happens is the balance comes along, it tells the escapement to unlock the gear train. The gear train accelerates from completely still up to very high speed. Then when it reaches a certain point, the balance tells the escapement, okay, that's enough. The escapement then relocks the gear train. The gear train has an instantaneous, like a shock, like an impact. And then it decelerates very, very fast. You've got a rapid acceleration from stopped, and then you've got like an instantaneous deceleration back to stop. So the gear train is normally still, but the being still is interspersed with 6 times per second, very rapid and even more rapid, very rapid acceleration and even more rapid deceleration. So that means that all of the wheels inside the watch are doing this, although you'll never see that with the naked eye. And similarly, the clutch is doing this as well. And similarly, those big wheels, the massive wheels on the back of the watch, which you see, they are also doing that 6 times per second. If you look at the microscope, you can actually see it. So what was happening was, because those wheels are so large, they've got enormous inertia. That means once they start moving, they don't want to stop. So what I worked out was happening was, the clutch was accelerating those wheels up to high speed. And then whenever the clutch stops, because the escapement stops, the gear train stops, the big wheel tries to keep moving. And it keeps moving, and it clunks the back of the teeth on the clutch and forces the clutch to slip, but forwards.
Yeah.
And
Because
so
there's
it
too much force
appears,
coming into the clutch. The clutch isn't able to handle the amount of
yeah.
backlash,
So
essentially, that's
effectively,
coming to it.
so the clutch is slipping, but it's slipping. It's being slipped forward by the continuing motion of the big wheels because of their very high inertia. So it took me a long time to get my head around that was what was going wrong. You see, and the interesting thing as well, with this sort of watchmaking, you can't analyze this with the geometry. The geometry doesn't help at this point. This phenomenon only occurs when things are moving at high speed. If you slow everything down and analyze it with CAD and stuff, you can't see any of this. It only happens. It's a dynamic effect, Todd. That's what I'm getting at. It's a dynamic effect which only shows itself when things are moving at high speed. So that was why then, in order to solve the problem, at the original version, we did lots of different things. First of all, I had to make the big wheels much lighter. So the original version of the wheels, they were much thicker and they were made in a different material. They were made in beryllium bronze. So then we first remade the wheels much thinner, with like literally thinner and much thinner spokes, much thinner rim, thinner everywhere. We made them in aluminium, but the aluminium version was literally like cheese. It was so soft, the wheels weren't really usable for the watchmakers. So we ended up remaking them in titanium. So the wheels that you see now are like, it's interesting, by making all those adjustments, by making the rims and arms and everything thinner and changing the material to titanium, they have the inertia of those present wheels is 7 times less than the original version of the wheels. So it makes an enormous difference. So that was the first thing. And then secondly, I had to increase the friction within the clutch, the frictional resistance of the clutch. But there's very little space available in the clutch. So there was, again, a series of incremental changes and improvements inside the clutch to understand how I could enlarge the frictional surfaces. There's a lot of mathematics as well and calculations in terms of how they actually calculate the friction that clutch will generate. So I did several new versions of the clutch to get all that to go. And then with the combination of the lighter big wheels and the increased friction inside the clutch, eventually the problem was solved, and now it all works. And how MB&F would test it was they would what we want to see is that the two chronographs, when they're running, they must always stay absolutely synchronized. If there's something funny going on, they will drift away from one another. You know what I mean? So if you let the watch run for a week, at the end of 1 week, the two should still be exactly synchronized. If there's something slipping, you'll see that they're no longer together. So what they do in MB&F is Serge, who's Max's partner, Serge he does lots of like high octane bicycling and mountain biking and stuff. So he wears the watch and he goes up and down several mountains with the watch on his wrist. And and that's how they test. If the chronographs are still synchronized at the end of really rough use, then we can say that everything is as it should be. But just to explain that to you, that takes 5 or 10 minutes to explain. But that was that was 9 months of purgatory, and like the clutches were remade several times, and but it wasn't just that; it was actually understanding what the hell is going on, because this initially it seemed that what's happening is impossible. It was mind bending.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the non-anticipated outcome that you were seeing, and then two, just like highlighting again the amount of force that is going on inside a watch. Because while that force might not mean anything to you or I, like maybe it's the equivalent of like a mosquito landing on you, right? But in something the size of a watch, it's a huge amount of force that's being applied to metal wheels and gears that are all interconnected. And that amount of force, like for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. There's nowhere for that to go, but it has to go somewhere within the watch. And so, when you saw the same outcome twice, you knew you weren't crazy and there was something going on, but then you spent the better part of a year backtracking it and trying to figure out solutions for it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and as I say, very disconcerting, because the fundamental difference with the perpetual was that I absolutely did not foresee this difficulty. And as I say, that is really, even now, that event has cast a very long shadow over my sort of my life as a watch designer. And that I'm always doubting myself, but my sort of total and utter self-doubt has become even worse since that happened, because I'm always thinking, well, now I'm designing something, but maybe there's something lurking in this that I haven't spotted, like happened with the sequential, so I'm always as I say, that's had a really long-term effect on me, the fact that I just didn't see that.
I would say that you're pushing the boundaries of what has been done. You're creating an entirely new chronograph and an entirely new style of chronograph. But the you know the amount of work that you put in to it has resulted in a watch that has won the GPHG, that is, as you said, has 5 patents. It's an absolutely incredible machine, Stephen. And again, just to, we were having this conversation before we started this podcast, was just the appreciation for how much blood, sweat, and tears and actual, humanity goes into creating a watch. And so when you add all the time together, all the time frames that you've mentioned today in terms of building this watch, you can understand how much of your life and your time this has consumed. And like you said, it's not just a 9 to 5. It's not, you can't just calculate it in 40 hours a week. Your mind is constantly churning on these problems. And so to appreciate that, to appreciate the amount of time it actually takes to build one of these, I think that's a relatable, again, back to your talk at Dubai. This is a relatable human standard or a relatable human story that sometimes, frankly, shit just doesn't go the way you want it to. And it takes a while to overcome.
So it's just, yeah, that's all true, Todd. Everything you say is true. But I would say in this particular case, again, another parallel with the perpetual calendar was that, the whole project hinged upon getting these clutches to work properly, and there was no workaround. There was no plan B. If the clutches couldn't be made to work in the right way, the whole project was in the bin. And what that meant was that, and this is related to my ongoing struggles with my own sort of anxiety problems and so on. But whenever it's even like whenever we we come on the phone an hour ago and you said, "How are you?" and I was like, I've got this problem that I'm really just drilling my head. And so that's how I feel at the minute. I've got something which is nowhere near as major as the clutch. Is just something which I will get sorted. It's just annoying me. That's all. But whenever I have, what I can't bear is things which are unresolved, Todd. I can't bear things which are outstanding, and it drives me absolutely round the twist. And so in terms of the chronograph and the prototyping, that was 9 months of, I just can't put it back in the box. Oh, I just want to get it working. And until I can get it working, I'm just in purgatory, And so that's a very long time to feel very anxious, near the best part of a year. And there's no escape from that. It's every moment I'm awake, or even when I'm not awake, the feeling doesn't go away. It's not just when I'm in the workshop working on it. If it's ongoing and it isn't working, I can't help it. I can't stop it overflowing into every other bit of my life, which is one of my things that I'm struggling with a lot, So the clutch had to work, and it's in my nature that once I've said I'm going to do it, I'm going to damn well do it, even if it kills me. And so, in a way, if I could just walk away and go, "Oh well, so it doesn't work. Too bad. Sorry, MB&F." My life would be a great deal easier, but it's not in my nature to operate like that. And once I've got my teeth into something, I'll damn well solve it if it kills me, and it very nearly did. So, yeah. But that's it. You see, that's it. These watches watch like that, which is cool. And I know, and it's very nice what you said about it. And yeah, you're right. It was a huge. I suppose it was a huge boost and a huge honor to get the Aiguille d'Or, the GPHG. And yeah, I suppose that was brilliant, because I suppose it was recognition for trying to do something which is new. And I suppose you have to push it to earn that prize. Of course you do. So it was great. It was really great to have that recognised, to have the watch recognised on the project. And that was huge. That was certainly the highlight in my little professional career so far. I don't take that lightly at all. That was a huge, big deal. But exactly like you were saying earlier, the price was really high. Really high.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an absolutely amazing watch, Stephen. It's stunning, but it sort of pales in comparison to getting to hear these stories from you and getting to understand the process behind bringing something like this to life. It's an incredible achievement, and thank you for sharing that with me.
It's a pleasure, Todd. Well, it's a bit that watch is it's exactly like I said at the end of the Dubai talk. If you get if you wear one of these things that I've put so much into, it is like you're wearing a wee bit of my soul on your wrist. I know that maybe sounds cliche, but that is truly how it feels. So I'm delighted to talk about it because it means so much to me, and it is so personal, and it's something I've put so much myself into. So like really, to get the chance. That's why it's nice to meet the collectors and meet people who really are interested and care about it and really appreciate it and really love it, and also people like yourself who are knowledgeable about it. It's a pleasure to chat and to talk about it because it's something that I could talk about it all day long. And if you're here with me in the workshop, we can go into 10 times more detailed thought if you want, and I can show you all the broken bits of clutches on all the various stages. And, we can go as far into it as you want. I love all that. I'm delighted. It pleases me no end to talk about it. Because it's not really something I do very often. So but yet I'm so interested in, and I'm so it is my it's just my absolute oxygen. It sounds crazy, but it is. So it's great. I love to have the opportunity to talk about it with a guy like yourself who gets it.
Absolutely. Well, you're on. I'm definitely going to come and visit the workshop and see all the broken bits of metal. But I will let you get through the current technical problem that you're facing, and let you get that sorted before I come visit. The other request I have for you is I would love to go see Harrison's clocks with you, because I would love to see them through your eyes.
I think that's a very good idea, Todd. Yes, I think everybody in this. I think actually, it's very funny you mentioned Harrison's clocks. I think there's a parallel between what we were talking about earlier, and Harrison's clocks. I'm amazed. Amazed meeting collectors and so on. How few people know much about Harrison's clocks, and a lot of people have never heard about them, or if they've heard about them, they don't understand the absolutely universe-changing significance of the clocks and the level of innovation, what was done in the era that it was done, just like we talked earlier about how it's maybe people whenever collectors want to get a watch and stuff that they almost need to being able almost having the means to buy it almost isn't enough. You should really almost like I don't know earn it or something like this, because you don't. And I think the same thing is with Harrison's clocks. I think it should be you talk about an entrance exam. I think the first 5 pages of the entrance exam to get a complicated, challenging watch should be the first 5 pages. The topic should be in-depth questions on John Harrison. And if you don't know, if you as a collector, if you don't know all about John Harrison, then I think you need to stop and go and check that out before you go any further on your collecting journey. It's absolutely essential knowledge for anybody who's into this stuff. And if you go and find out about it, you'll find that it's one of the most fascinating and incredible stories you've ever come across.
And we will plug the book Longitude here, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes too, because it's a great read. It's worth knowing. And I mean, Harrison himself, for a carpenter who knew nothing about clockmaking, who taught himself everything, and who used natural materials to solve for lubrication problems, it's incredible. The amount of innovation that he displayed was absolutely incredible.
That's right. And as I say, when he did it as well, he did that in an era when there was no electric motors, there was no modern machine tools, no optics. It wasn't even electric light. He did it all by oil lamps and candles. It's incredible. I was in London. Was in London a couple of months ago, and I was at the Science Museum in London, and they have the Science Museum. By the way, the Science Museum have a brilliant horology department. If anybody has the chance to go to the Science, if you're in London, go and look at that, as well as Harrison's clocks in Greenwich. But in the Science Museum, they also have they have some Harrison stuff which isn't at Greenwich. They've got H5, and they've got some of his early long case clocks when he was designing incredibly accurate long case clocks, and the Grasshopper escapement, and they've got his actual clock, some of his actual clocks with the wooden wheels, and the door on the case has got all his handwritten time observations in his ink pen, in his handwriting right in front of you. It'll blow your mind. Go and have a look.
Amazing. That's amazing. Is there a marine chronometer in your future, Stephen? Do you have any desire to build a clock?
I do, yes. I'm very, very interested in clocks, actually, Todd. But not my secret fascination is master clocks, which
yes,
is.
I remember talking about this on the
last
episode
before.
we did. Yeah.
So there's lots of master clocks, and they're all sort of electromechanical. They have a very interesting electrically reset gravity escapement. So they're kind of a combination of mechanics and electromagnetics. Very, very old fashioned, not electronics but electromagnetics. And So I've got several ideas of a clock I would love to build, which is effectively a fully mechanical version of that. So this brilliant. The system works that instead of having a tick and a tock every second, with a master clock, one of the reasons they're very accurate is that the pendulum is only impulsed every 30 seconds. So that means that for 29 seconds, the pendulum's completely free. If you look at the theory behind watch and clock making, will tell you that the more you interfere with the oscillator, the more you push and pull the oscillator to put energy back into it, the more you degrade the timekeeping. So you want to let the oscillator be as free as possible. That's why there is a fundamental problem with watches, because every tick and every tock is the oscillator being pushed by the mechanism. So every time you do that, you degrade the timekeeping. You want to let the thing be as free as possible. So these clocks, they're only impulsed by the mechanism once every 30 seconds. So for 29 seconds, it's almost entirely free. Brilliant. So, but the reset is done electromagnetically, and I would love to do it. I'd love to do a few ideas for just for fun, for a clock that would do this entirely mechanically and reset the gravity arm every 30 seconds, all mechanically. I think maybe once my eyesight's gone and I've got my motorbike finished and I'm too old to ride it, then I'll maybe work on that when I'm sort of retired. Just as I say, just for fun. But I love that sort of stuff. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's multiple futures for you, Stephen. Maybe one in the in the world of Norton restoration, and maybe you'll be the second motorcycle maker to be featured in the Mad Gallery. Because knowing you, I'm sure there's some modifications that may come to those Nortons. And then we'd love to see a clock from you. That would be absolutely stunning. Stephen, I have taken way more of your time than I intended to. I want to let you get on with your evening, get to your family. But thank you. This has been an immense pleasure. It's always amazing to speak with you. I would love to come visit the workshop and share that with everyone here. Thank you for being you, and thank you for creating what you do and for being so open and so willing to share about your creative process and how everything comes together.
Well, Todd, it's an immense pleasure, really, and it's very nice to talk about, as I say. So really, the pleasure's all mine. So anytime.
Stephen, thank you so much.